Thank you, Katrina. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and everyone at the embassy. Thank you to all the members of the advisory committee for this wonderful award, to all the elected officials who are with us here today and were with us last night, especially Representatives Huizenga and Kilmer, Minority Leader Pelosi, and of course Secretary Albright. To all our other distinguished guests, to the members of the Scholarship Board, who I was delighted have been able to travel with us, including Donna Stanton and Herb Epstein, Gary LaMarche, and Robert Dykegraf from our Ambassadors Council. Our board chair, Catherine Stimson, asked me to convey her personal regrets for not being able to join us due to commitments in New York, but to also pass on the immense gratitude of our board and to note that this honor, she says, doubles, no, trebles the commitment of our board for this important work. I want to thank New York University for giving us a home for our work for 15 years, and our Vice Provost, Uli Baer, who traveled down from New York to join us. Thank you, Uli. All our foundation partners and individual donors who, of course, make our work possible. Our incredibly dedicated, intelligent, and I have to say, overworked staff, and all the colleges and universities, institutes, and associations that are part of our network around the world, and on whose behalf I'm very, very pleased to stand here and receive this award. And finally, I have to thank all the scholars and their families who we serve, and who, through their courage, their intelligence, and their persistence in the face of extremely grave threats, inspire us every day. And as Katrina said, we're really fortunate to have several here with us tonight. Zelalem Kibret from Ethiopia, this morning, Teng Biao from China, Hande Gürses from Turkey, Delaram Farzaneh from Iran, and Radwan Ziadeh from Syria. Thank you all for being here. It truly is an honor to be here. It's an honor to share this day with Father O'Donovan and the Jesuit Refugee Service. It's a special honor to be recognized by the Embassy of the Netherlands, as our ties to the Netherlands and the Dutch people run very deep. Not least the fact that I have lived for many years now on Schermerhorn Street in a place called Brooklyn, which are both Dutch names, which remind us that the ties between our peoples literally go back to the roots of this nation. But more recently, Scholars at Risk has had the great privilege and honor to work with the University Assistance Fund, which is a Dutch NGO, which has had for over 75 years assisted refugee students in the Netherlands, and for the last 10 years partnered with Scholars at Risk to assist threatened scholars in the Netherlands and all across Europe. I'm deeply grateful to our original partner, the former director, Kees Blijkrot, who sadly passed too young in 2012, to their current director, Marjan Sehali, and all the UAF staff. We and UAF are deeply proud that all of the Dutch universities, 21 institutions in all, are members of our global network, and together they have hosted nearly 100 scholars in the Netherlands, from Turkey and Syria and Congo and Iraq, Eritrea, Zimbabwe, and more, including 15 currently being hosted in the Netherlands. And of course, it's a deeply humbling honor to be associated with a recognition that is named for Anne Frank. Now, as you might imagine, in my job, I do get to travel a fair bit. I try to visit as many of the universities in our network as I can to see as many of the scholars. But as time is short, I rarely get to see anything else. I go from airport to university, back to airport to university, and back home. But a significant exception was one year when I made a point of scheduling time to visit the Anne Frank House. And I should share that I was in Amsterdam for an event with our Dutch partners, UAF. They had had the brilliant idea of transcribing the personal stories of some of the scholars we work with and turning it into a series of monologues that was performed by actors. And this toured all of the university cities in the Netherlands and has since been performed in Ireland and Germany and Norway and the US and elsewhere. And so I was in Amsterdam for the culminating performance in the biggest theater in Amsterdam with hundreds of people present. And just before the lights dimmed, Kees Blijkrot walked in, who, as I mentioned, was the former director. And I was surprised to see him because I knew he was out on sick leave. And he was, despite looking great, very, very ill. And he was surprised to see me because I live in the other Brooklyn in New York. We had no time for words. We just had an embrace, and a glance, a look, and we knew it would be the last time we would see each other. So the next morning I found myself outside the Anne Frank house in a light rain, and inevitably death was in the air. The death of Anne Frank and her mother and her sister, of the Van Pels and Fritz Pfeffer, of the millions of Jews and other victims of the war, and the prospect of the loss of my friend. But rather than sadness, I experienced that moment as a gift. Just as I experienced that last embrace with my friend as a gift. That's what the Anne Frank house does. It makes real and tangible this incredible story of Anne Frank. Yes, it makes real and tangible that there is evil in the world, and there is suffering in the world. But more than that, that house and her story makes real and tangible the dignity and the humanity of the threatened and the vulnerable. And I think even more than that, it makes real and tangible a truth that our dignity and our humanity are intertwined with theirs. That our dignity and our humanity demand that we do our very best to assist those who are facing hatred and conflict and oppression wherever, whenever, however we can. That is what Case and Mark-John and everyone at UAF, that is what everyone in the Global Scholars at Risk Network is trying to do, to see the world through the eyes of our colleagues who are facing threats, and to act and to help them whenever and however we can. Together, we can save today's Anne Frank. All we have to do is help one more. One more refugee, one more scholar, one more family. That is the measure of our success. One more. Each time we help just one more, I think we honor the legacy of Anne Frank, and we change history for the better. We at Scholars at Risk, we do this primarily by arranging positions of temporary professional sanctuary for scholars at universities in our network from any country and any discipline who are threatened for who they are and what they do wherever they are. Last year alone, we helped arrange 158 positions for scholars, which was a record. Unfortunately, we have more than 700 scholars on our list currently, which is also a record. Many of these suffer the same threats as others would suffer in countries experiencing conflict or war, including, for example, hundreds of scholars from Syria and Iraq. But others suffer more targeted attacks, attacks that are consciously intended to silence scholars one way or the other. Why? Why are scholars particularly attacked? Because they ask questions. Zelalem Kibret, who's with us, asked questions about social and political justice as a part of the Zone 9 blogging collective in Ethiopia. For this, he was imprisoned for 15 months. Teng Biao asked questions about rule of law while defending death penalty cases, freedom of speech cases, religion cases, human rights defenders on trial for their work, and ethnic minorities on trial for who they are. And for this, he was repeatedly arrested, detained, beaten, and tortured. Hande Gerses asked questions about peace. She, along with over 1,100 other academics, signed what has become known as the Academics for Peace petition, which asked questions about the government's treatment of minorities and urged continuing renewed dialogue. For this, she and hundreds of other academics have lost their positions and now face imprisonment. Delaram Farzaneh asked questions about restrictions imposed on women through the legal system. Questions which led to the publication of her recent book, Step Down, You're a Woman, A History of Women's Rights and Women Judges in Iran, available on Amazon. And Radwan Ziadeh asked questions about the future of Syria and its people, in particular about accountability for the gross human rights violations that are taking place under the current regime. For this, he was forced to flee Syria, and now, due to an unfortunate misinterpretation of US asylum law, is fighting a decision to have him removed from the United States and returned to Syria, where he will certainly face imprisonment or worse. So my many, many thanks I want to say to all the elected officials, including Senator Leahy, who signed letters on behalf of Radwan asking asylum officials to re-examine that decision. However, I think perhaps more important than the particular questions that any one scholar asks, universities are attacked, scholars are attacked because they teach people to ask questions and to demand good answers. In the words of a Palestinian university president who participated in a workshop some years ago that Scholars at Risk organized in Jordan, the university is the place where we learn to leave our guns at the door and to resolve issues through evidence and reason and persuasion. They are attacked because there are those who prefer the certainty of violence over the unpredictability of reason and persuasion. Those who would prefer a single dominant point of view, their own, over a forum from many voices. Next month, Scholars at Risk will release our annual Free to Think report. It's the report of our monitoring project, monitoring attacks on universities around the world. I want to acknowledge Brian Joseph and Sam Chuntavong from the National Endowment for Democracy, who I believe are here somewhere, for NED's support, which helps to make this project possible. The report will document 256 attacks in 35 countries over the last year alone, and we know this is just the tiniest tip of the iceberg. These include suicide bombings and violent attacks on universities in Nigeria and Pakistan. As I said, dismissals of thousands of higher education professionals in Turkey. Violent repression of student movements in South Africa, Zimbabwe, Thailand, and Venezuela. Widespread restrictions on scholars' travel, including attempts to restrict travel here in the United States, and attempts to shut down universities in Central and Eastern Europe, most notably the Central European University in Budapest. Together, these incidents highlight a global crisis of attacks on universities that I think should be a warning cry to all of us who care about human rights. When the simple act of asking questions is conflated with disloyalty and punished as a crime, it is a threat not only to academic freedom, it's a threat to democracy itself. State officials, courts, higher education leaders, all of civil society, everywhere we must resist this conflation of questions with disloyalty before it spreads like a virus and gives cover to any authority that wants to declare certain questions are too sensitive, too probing, and not open to examination. Instead, all of us are called on to demand universal recognition of the principle that ideas are not crimes, and that critical inquiry and discourse is not disloyalty, but rather that is a scholar's duty. And indeed, I would say, asking questions and demanding good answers is the duty of all of us in a free society. So let me close by again thanking the scholars who are here for their personal courage and as symbols of all the scholars who we serve. Let me again thank everyone connected to a higher education institution around the world that is part of this good work that is being honored today. I can't help it, but let me invite all of you connected to a higher education institution that is not yet part of our network to please urge them to join our network so that together we might continue to honor the legacy of Anne Frank by helping one more scholar. Just one more scholar, that is the measure of our continuing success. Thank you, thank you, thank you for this wonderful recognition.